I'm Carl Fays and welcome to the Marriage Webcast brought to you by the Australian Christian Lobby. Tonight we look at marriage and specifically, do Christian values and ideals for marriage still matter? Should marriage remain between a man and a woman in today's world? Can Christians continue to advocate for the biological meaning of marriage publicly? This webcast is shown across Australia tonight to around 500 venues, from Boone to Bunbury, Broome in fact, to Bunbury in Western Australia, to Emerald in Queensland and down to Launceston in Tasmania, where I hear they're frozen. But it's good to have you with us. It represents all denominations, and tonight we have an outstanding panel to help discuss the issues that are really important. Unfortunately, Christopher Pearson has to apologise for tonight. He's unwell and his doctor has said he can't travel. But we do have with us John Anderson, former Deputy Prime Minister and former leader of the National Party of Australia. Patrick Parkinson AM is a Professor of Law at the University of Sydney. Patricia Wera-Kroon is a medical doctor, sexologist and writer. Alan Meyer is a pastor, and along with his wife Helen, who's also on the panel, are the founders of Careforce Life Keys. Helen Meyer has a tertiary education in human relations, a Master's in Education and a Master's in Counselling. Will you please welcome the panel?
Thank you. Thank you.
Tonight is live at 7:30 from Eastern Standard Time, and we encourage you to join the conversation by commenting on Twitter. Make sure you add the hashtag marriage before you tweet. So to our first question, which is really a broad one, why does marriage matter? Why defend the institution of marriage, and why is marriage important? I want to go first to Alan as a pastor. From your perspective, why is marriage important?
Well, it's important in just so many ways. Firstly, it's foundational. David Blankenhorn, in his book The Future of Marriage, said this. He said, "The evidence that marriage is defined here, that is between a man and a woman, to the exclusion of all others for life. The evidence that marriage as defined here is a universal human institution is overwhelming. In fact, especially in the light of the vastness of the human historical record and the variety of human sexual experience, the power and the prevalence of this one sexual institution across time and across cultures is so noteworthy and so empirically incontrovertible that I'm tempted to say all human societies." Now, it might be possible to point to one or two exceptions to that in history, but as a statement, it is defensible. The fact is that marriage is profoundly foundational to human societies and across cultures for all of human experience. The problem I think we face in the West, and one of the issues we have to address, is the fact that the West is struggling with a big story or a meta story for life. Something on which to found its discussion on the big issues like marriage. Richard Dawkins, when he was speaking at the University of Washington in 2009, was willing to say to that audience that he was aware that his perspective on life left him with 4 unsolved mysteries. Firstly, the origin of life. How would life ever have begun? For that, he said, there really at this moment is no answer. Secondly, the origin of sex. Thirdly, the origin of consciousness, and then the origin of morality. And these are somewhat big issues when it comes to life.
Just a little.
And when it comes to the issue of building a human society. The Bible, however, has a meta-story. And in the meta-story of the Bible, sex is foundational. The gender actually matters. The Bible records in that very simple description of creation, male and female, as expressions of God's divine nature, that gender is designed, not accidental, it is not the end product of a mindless mechanistic universe, and that the purpose of gender was marriage. Now, as a Christian, my issue is to be a follower of Christ. What did Jesus say about this? I mean, what did Jesus think about gender? What did he think about marriage? I think it's important to recognise that Jesus drew his followers to the core issues at the heart of God and God's concern for people. For example, when he came to deal with the issue of you shall not kill, Jesus went to the core and said it's a lot more than just killing. It's about anger and disruptive behaviour that fills people with fear and destroys families and marriages. When it comes to adultery, it's more than just the act. It's about the purity of heart that allows a community to function well. What did Jesus think about marriage? Well, we aren't left to wonder about that, because in Matthew chapter 19, Jesus was asked, what did he think about the issue of divorce? And he responded in a way that gives us an insight to how Jesus viewed the foundational nature of marriage when he said this: "Have not you read that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female?" You may not embrace the creation as a meta story, but Jesus did. And as a follower of Christ, therefore I embrace that the meta story, that gender is created. And for this reason, he said, a man will leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh, so they are no longer two, but they're one. Therefore, what God has joined together. Jesus viewed marriage as a God kind of joining. He viewed it as foundational to the creation. And if you just go a few more verses later, he addresses the issue of, well, what do you do then with sexual passions if marriage is problematic for you? And Jesus' view on sex was that it was not simply a matter of personal self-indulgence, that everybody is called, in Jesus' thinking, to see sex as being an issue that was created for the purpose of marriage, and everybody else is called to a life of chastity. And I know that creates challenges for every one of us. For heterosexuals, for same-sex attraction, it presents challenges to everybody. But if you're going to be a follower of Jesus Christ, you have to take gender seriously, and you have to take marriage as foundational to human relationships.
Fantastic. Coming on from that, Patrick, give us a bit of a picture from a social cohesion point of view. From our society's point of view, what difference does marriage make there?
It's best to think of marriage as the glue which holds the atoms of society together, which gives it solidity and strength. Alan mentioned the legal definition of marriage, which is the union of a man and a woman for life, to the exclusion of all others. And that union is fundamental. It's a social union. It's the companionship of a man and woman. We are created to be social beings, and marriage is at the heart of that. It's at the heart of being an economic unit. Families are efficient economic units to share housing and resources, electricity and all these other things. It's also a caring unit. And obviously we think of families as caring for children. We should think about it as caring for the elderly as well, for mum's parents, for dad's parents. Families do all of that. They are foundational to the support structures of society. But why marriage? Well, that definition, the union of a man and a woman for life to the exclusion of all others, is critical to the whole thing, because it's as we make that commitment and as we maintain that commitment, if we can do both man and woman, we have the security to take risks as a family. And women in particular take all sorts of risks. Have you thought of having children as a risk? It is. It's a risk in the sense that you become more economically vulnerable, financially dependent, and security and stability of that union, when both of you have committed to be together for life to the exclusion of all others. You're not worried about other sexual attractions or partners because you've both committed to fidelity. That is foundational. And as we have lost our commitment to marriage as a society, we have seen a whole realm of social problems which have emerged from that. John, marriage is the glue.
Sorry, John, can you follow on that from somebody that's been in government in our nation? Where do you see marriage there, in following on from what Patrick's just been saying?
Well, look, I think the point that I would make is that I am a Christian, and I believe for those reasons, as a Christian, that have been given to us, that marriage is a very important institution. I also accept that in a society that is pluralist, that in which we divide state and church, we cannot impose our will on others. We cannot do that. But we have both the absolute right to put forward our worldview, as does everyone else in our community, and to ask respectfully that it be respectfully heard and at least considered. And I think there are very powerful public policy reasons why we should be defending marriage over and above the reasons that derive from our beliefs. societies right down through the ages, take a bird's eye view of this, and extant across the globe today, still recognise the importance of the family as a basic unit in society and the proper environment in which to raise children. It is really only in the West, and this is a point that ought to be made in the context of those people who are saying that Australia's fallen behind, other countries are moving further down this road than us. A few isolated communities at a particular point in time, which just happened, by the way, to be in the West, a culture which has lost its way, where it's cut itself free from its moorings and is very unsure about what it believes in anymore, at the same time as it is evidently in serious trouble, that wants to go down this road. And I would say that we need to be very, very careful here. We should defend this institution for good public policy reasons. Marriage is not a purely private affair. There are private aspects of it. But in reality, if you stop and think about it, it is enormously important in a public sense as well. When marriages do not function, as Professor Parkinson has said, society pays an enormous price. When it does function well, society benefits economically and socially and in every other way. You stop and think about the enormous cost of family breakdown, of dysfunctional home environments now, and the way that that plays out in our communities. So it's good that we have a debate about marriage. We haven't had one for a long time. We need to focus on its importance, on its benefits, but we need to be willing to define what it really is. I would go so far as to say to you that if the West cannot decide what marriage is, then the West really is in deep trouble.
Thank you, John. As you can see, this panel really struggles to speak, so we'll get through about 3 questions tonight. But our next question actually comes from our studio audience, and it's from Gary Franks. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Carl. There's obviously a number of perspectives in this argument of defining marriage: sociological, theological, psychological, emotional. As a medical practitioner, however, I'm interested in the biological perspective, and I'd like to ask particularly Patricia, could she elaborate on some of those biological reasons why we should not, in fact, meddle with the definition of marriage as between a male and a husband and a wife? It's already been touched on a bit by Alan, but could you elaborate on that, please?
Thank you, Gary. Patricia.
Yeah, I mean, the male and female bodies, just looking at a biological point of view, are very similar in many ways. I mean, like, we've all got hearts and lungs and stuff, but there's just one exquisite difference, and that is our genitalia and our reproductive system. And you see, there is such a created goodness. I mean, I'm a sexologist, which means that for the last 20 years, I've just basically been studying and talking and everything 24/7 about sex. So, you know, the point is that when you look at the male and the female genitalia, it's just such a beautiful anatomical fit. We're just made to fit as male and female. And not just that, the plumbing, the hard wiring of our brain is just made for perfect male-female fit. As sex scientists, we talk about what we call the sexual response. I mean, that's just a big term for what happens when you get together and make love. But the point is that even there is a complementarity between the male sexual response and the female, so that there is a fit. So when God said, go procreate and fill the world, he also made it wonderful fun when you were doing it as a man and a woman.
Which is a great encouragement for all of us. Helen, from a family, from a family psychological point of view, how do you see that complementarity that we've been just chatting about?
Well, the most important thing for a family, obviously, is stability. And as an educator and as a counsellor, dealing with kids who are in unstable environments and watching the issues of them struggle for their cognitive development, their emotional development, and their social development, working with them and seeing the behavioural problems we have in schools, and knowing that unless a kid has a stable environment and where the mum and dad love each other and it's a safe place for them, then the outcomes for the kid can be quite negative. And the aggressive behaviour we've seen in classes, and we hear so much about it now in terms of teachers trying to struggle with what's going on in schools. So from my perspective, the stability is really, really important.
Outstanding, thank you. There's much discussion in our community that those advocating for same-sex marriage want what heterosexual couples are looking for, a settled marriage in a stable environment. However, not everyone in the gay community aspires to that. Gay activist Dennis Altman was speaking on a gay writers panel in May in Sydney this year. On the panel, they discussed the question of same-sex marriage and specifically the attitude of many gay male couples to monogamy. Now, in that question, this is what Altman had to say on that panel.
Now, I'm going to speak now as a gay man, and one of the things about gay male culture is that it is not a monogamous culture. And all the evidence we have suggests that monogamy is a myth, that there are many long-standing gay relationships. There are virtually no long-standing monogamous gay relationships.
I mean, that's a pretty remarkable statement for someone who's advocating for same-sex marriage. Helen, why is monogamy important to the family, even though that sounds like such an odd question to ask, but why is it important?
It isn't really odd because I think monogamy is really important in terms of investing in each other's lives. And you don't have a great marriage, you don't have a great family environment without investing in each other's lives. That takes time, it takes energy. It takes working through the issues and the struggles that come up in a family because, as we all know, we've got 4 kids, we had 3 sons and a daughter, what it's like to have to work with the family. So investing in that. And then the level of intimacy that comes through a monogamous relationship is something you can't possibly get when you go from partner to partner. It's just not possible because of our wiring. We're actually wired to stick to a person, and then if you unstick and go to the next partner, then the investment and the trust issues become lesser, and then it becomes an issue where you can no longer invest in an ongoing relationship because you become so damaged by multiple partners.
Thank you, Helen. Patricia, what's your response to that?
I was just trying to come in on that when she said stuck. Because, I mean, as a sexologist, I mean, when I bring my twin passions of God and sex together, it just fascinates me how science is now just pointing to the truths of the Bible. And this is one of those. Because today we know, with brain science at the way we can study it, that when you look at a man and a woman coming together in sexual intercourse, there is a brain bonding that happens. And there's a hormone we call oxytocin, which we scientists call the cuddle hormone. And the more sex you have as man and woman, the higher you bond, because every time you have an orgasm, your oxytocin goes through the roof. And so we call that the virtuous cycle. So you have more sex and you bond even more. And then there's another hormone called vasopressin, which is actually called the monogamy hormone, because there are prairie voles, which when they have vasopressin, they just bond to each other. And vasopressin levels go up when a man and a woman have sex. So God sort of says, do it, and then he says, oh, by the way, I give you the brain mechanism to make it really easy.
Fantastic.
That's great.
But I, you know, just to build on that as a non-academic, a wise old man said to my wife and I just before we got married, if you want to know how to raise your children, everybody's going to give you advice, and there are endless books out there. But the key thing I can tell you is that what your children need to know is that mum and dad love each other.
Yeah.
And then they'll have a secure enough environment in which they can grow emotionally. And the thing that we noticed from a very early age, an astonishingly early age with our 4 children, was that they tended to look for different things from mum and from dad, and both, I would suggest, are very important. Nurture and warmth from mum, and play and stimulation from me. And coming from, as I'm very fortunate to be able to say, in my own case, you know, a family that's been quite sort of close and tight, particularly on my wife's side. The interesting thing was that my mother-in-law and those sort of generations said, yes, we noticed that all the time in our own children.
So, John, that's good. There's plenty of cuddle hormone going on there. Patrick, reminding what we've said.
Dangerous place to be, this.
The statement was made that, you know, there are virtually no monogamous relationships, and they're asking for the same sort of relationship that heterosexual couples have in marriage. From the children's point of view, just following on from what John said, where do you see that as being important, the monogamous relationship?
I think it's a really critical issue in this debate. Do gay male couples really want marriage in the sense that we mean it as the union for life to the exclusion of all others? But it's that critical element of marriage which gives the children the stability to grow, as John Anderson has explained. So that's where I see the connection. There's a real risk that we will lose everything about marriage. We've already lost it's for life. We've already lost it's to the exclusion of all others to some extent. But if we lose the man and woman bit too, what is there left of what marriage means culturally for us?
Yeah, thank you. We've been taking questions over email for the past month, and this one is from David Aberline in Victoria, and he says, and many would have experienced this, when discussing same-sex marriage, I am often called homophobic because I don't consider the feelings of the individuals who are homosexual. How can we include the suffering individual in our message and what is best for our nations? Christians have been constantly referred to as homophobic or bigots due to their position. Helen Meyer, tough question, but is that the case? Now, I'm kind of like asking you, do you believe you're homophobic? And obviously the answer is no, but how do you answer that question? What's your response?
Well, first of all, I don't think I am homophobic. I grew up, my closest friend from primary school was homosexual, and so that I had a very first-hand experience of that. But in terms of our ministry, in terms of the things we do, we take people where they are. And I would hope that we'd have enough compassion to be able to have this debate without using hateful language, without hurting one another, without being vitriolic or hostile or aggressive. So to me, if I'm homophobic, I think there would be hostility, there would be a denial of their human dignity and all those kinds of things, which I don't believe is the case. In our ministry, we had couples who came to our church who were same-sex couples, and they felt it was a safe enough environment because of the things we did in trying to encourage families, in helping children, in dealing with those who've been sexually abused in and out of the church, and also working with people in our community. They felt safe enough to actually be in our environment. So I think that speaks volumes about, at least from where I stand.
Yeah, I want to come back to Alan on that and your experience. But John, some reflections from people internationally about this picture about whether Christians are homophobic.
Yeah, look, it's an important question. It's regrettable that the word is, I think, used in some quarters in an attempt to sort of intimidate and put people off. Now, there are times when I'm sure people have been homophobic, both Christians and non-Christians. And it's a good thing that as a society we've moved beyond that. It's particularly important that Christians not display that characteristic. And sometimes, you know, progressives who are pushing some of these lines, I think, do go a bit overboard and sort of forget that Christians, when they are being true to their beliefs, are people who love, regardless of what activities another person might be engaged in. And I was reminded the other day of a very interesting article, you can Google it if you like, in the opinion pages of the Guardian newspaper. Roy Hattersley is a man who has no truck with Christianity. He's a very bright writer who was a Labor cabinet minister, a very well-known public figure in Great Britain. He wrote an article recently called Faith Does Breed Charity, and amongst other things he said, you know, I'm one of those people who rejects the Christian idea that there's a God who doesn't like homosexual behaviour. But while I and my friends sit around the dinner table, I'm paraphrasing, but roughly this is what he said, scoffing at people who do have those beliefs, I have to concede that more than likely it's the Christians that you'll find out there helping people in need, including homosexuals, who are facing a crisis or need medical attention or need whatever. Now that is the right model, and it's very honest of him to concede that point. And it raises something else that I think I would say. I'm very concerned that in our culture now we're losing civility. Now I have beliefs that I am expressing here tonight that I will no doubt be taken to task over, but I would say I think it's important that I be allowed to put those in a calm and rational, I hope, considered way, and not in a homophobic way at all. Because I don't want to be homophobic. That is not my objective. I hope I'm not. I don't believe I am. But it would be very useful if we were to take some of the shrillness out of this debate, to recognise that what is being advocated here by those who want change is the overturning of centuries of established wisdom, and I use those words very carefully, by this and many other cultures, and they need to make the case so that those who will ultimately make the decision, and I believe that's the Australian people in the end through their parliaments, make their decision on an informed basis, not one where they're responding to intimidation or inadequate or poorly presented advice. I think that is really important. We need to calm this thing down and behave like grown-up and civilised people. I really do think that it's incumbent upon Australians to do that. That's what Australians everywhere I meet in the streets these days say they expect from their parliamentarians. Can't imagine why they're saying that at the moment, but they are.
Well, it's good to have
it's incumbent on
expectations.
us all, I think, to then not be hypocrites in it.
Absolutely.
We need to raise the tone, I believe, and the civility and the information base and the fact-seeking basis of this whole debate.
Thank you, John. Alan, Helen kind of hinted the fact that you're actually dealing in the ministry that you do with people that struggle with this on an ongoing basis. Do they see you as phobic if you have a view that's contrary to their lifestyle?
Well, the issue of homophobia is one that doesn't even enter into my thinking. I have a view on sex. I think sex is holy. I have a view on sex that it was designed for marriage. Now, everybody struggles with sex. Heterosexuals struggle with it. Same-sex attracted people struggle with it. Everybody struggles with sex. The issue is, how are we supposed to handle this? And I have a view that as a follower of Christ, what I'm intending to do is to seek to honour his claim on my life. Now, I'm in a fortunate situation that I have an appropriate place for the expression of that in the marriage that I have. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the fact that I grew up in a home where my father loved my mother. It had a huge impact on my life, and one of the reasons I'm still married is because I had such a profoundly encouraging example. But I've felt the pressure of my own sexuality. I mean, I've felt the unfortunate and unhelpful attraction to women that aren't my wife. And the reason that we're still married after 44 years and still love one another is not because I haven't felt the pressure of my own sexuality, but because I've simply made a decision about how that's going to be handled. I'm going to handle it in such a way. I said to this girl when she was 19 years of age, forsaking all others and cleaving only unto you, in sickness and in health, if for better for worse, till death us do part. And that's required some significant self-control and some significant denial of my personal passions in order to fulfil that. One of the things I'm grateful for is that she still loves me. I heard this great statement that married men live longer. I said that at a marriage once, and a guy yelled out from the back, "No, mate, it only feels longer." Well, the reality is that marriage has been so good for my health, but I tell you what, it has required some significant discipline. So when I see someone else struggling with his sexuality, who's going to throw a stone? I mean, it's an issue that virtually everybody will face in their life, the appropriate management of their sexual passions. And if whatever area that gives you a problem in, my job is not to throw a stone at you, but to help you to manage it well.
Thank you, Alan. Listen, we've got a question from Jess Shirley in the audience, and it's actually, I would like, Alan, for you to start the answer on this.
Thanks, Carl. Hi, Alan. I have a question regarding the Church's teachings on homosexual relationships. Firstly, what is the Church's teaching on homosexual relationships? And then also, do we believe that homosexuals automatically go to hell?
Wow. Well, thanks for that one. As a follower of Jesus, my question is, what did Jesus think about that? Some will say Jesus never had anything to say about that. I don't agree that that's true. I think in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus made a very important statement. He said, "I did not come to abolish the law, I came to fulfill it." In other words, I am not discounting the wisdom of the Old Testament, but it is going to need to be rethought in the light of the amazing grace of God. And then what Jesus did was he went back to the core of God's heart that was in the law and explained what that was intended to do for the living of a life that was both God-honouring and wonderful as far as people are concerned. I have to say, I do not believe the New Testament contemplates homosexual marriage. So I don't think you can find it there. And so I would take the view that the New Testament approach to marriage is that sex and gender were created for the purpose of marriage. That's where sex has its appropriate expression, and others are called to the challenging life of chastity. Now, what about heaven and hell? I don't laugh off the issue of heaven and hell because, you see, at the end of the day, I don't think I'm going to stand in the court of public opinion. I think one day I'm going to stand in the presence of God. That's my view of life. I think there will be a day when I will render an account to my Creator for the life that I have lived. Now, I thank God that the issue of heaven and hell is not based on the level of my performance in this life. I thank God that there's a psalm that says this: "Blessed are those whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man or the woman whose sin the Lord will never count against him." Heaven or hell is based on what Jesus did on the cross, not how well I have developed in managing the challenging issues of life. So the question of heaven and hell then becomes this: am I a Christ follower? Jesus was very politically incorrect. He said, "I am the way, the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me," so I'm following him. And the core blessing of the New Testament is that it is possible for sinful people to be viewed in the eyes of God as not only totally forgiven but as righteous as Jesus. Every one of us have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and we continue to do things that are unhelpful and dishonouring both to God and people every day of our lives. Heaven and hell is not based on the level of my perfection, but it is based on the level in which I'm travelling. Now, a person can be struggling with all kinds of things. It may be anger, it may be alcohol, it may be drugs, it may be making a marriage work, it may be same-sex attractions. There are 1,000 ways in which people can be pressured in unhelpful ways to do things that do not honour God or conform with God's call upon their life. Salvation is not based on how far down the track I've come. It's based on who I'm following. And I thank God that you can be struggling with all kinds of things. And if Jesus Christ is the one in whom you've put your trust, then heaven is your home. Now, you do need to recognise that you need to be following him. You can't be going in the other direction. And so my simple statement to people is this: no matter what you're struggling with, no matter what the challenges are that you face, there is a Saviour and his name is Jesus. Just follow him and see where it leads.
That's fantastic, Alan. Another question from the audience, this time from Patrick Lengrell. Patrick, can you, a question I think to John Anderson, is that right, Patrick?
Sure, that's right. Thanks for taking my question. On this issue about gay marriage, two key sort of concepts are constantly proclaimed at all levels of society. And the first is that the majority of Australians are in support of same-sex marriage. And this is sort of further reinforced by the idea that, you know, all of the popular people, all the cool people, the celebrities, the actors, the models are all in favour of it. Who can be against it? The second thing, which is often waved around like a magic wand that sort of silences debate, is the claim that it's inevitable. It's going to happen. You know, move out of the way. Don't be caught on the wrong side of history. Now, these two things often sort of sap the energy of defenders of real marriage. But is it really the case about these two things? Is it really the case that the majority of Australians are in support? And is it really inevitable?
John?
I'll roll the two together. Thank you for the question. I think, if I may, roll the two together by saying that, no, I do not believe it's inevitable. I actually believe it's very useful that we're having this debate about marriage. And the longer it runs and the more thorough it is, I think you'll find the more the Australian people who really are not the cool set or the celebrities, or dare I say it, the media, who seem universally of one view on this, but they're very pragmatic and thoughtful people. I've had years in public life. Intuitively and collectively, with the right information, they make the right call. I preface my remarks by saying that because You see, I don't think we've had a wide-ranging debate. We haven't had to stop to think about what marriage is and what it means to our society for a very long time. We haven't had to, have we? Now, that's been unfortunate in many ways because we've let it slip, let our understanding slip. In many ways, we've trashed it. I mean, one of the great ironies about our shifting attitudes towards marriage is that when I was a university student 30 years ago, it was only 30 years ago, the progressives, as they like to be called now, were against marriage. It was entrapment. It was ensnarement. It was enslavement. It was enforced prostitution. Now the same people have decided, many of them, that it's so wonderful, everyone must have access to it. There's a great inconsistency in that if you stop and think about it. If we really focus on this, and that's what tonight's about, an honest, fair dinkum debate and examination of this issue, we will start to realise that there are very profound public implications that are likely to flow from us continually redefining marriage, because in the end that's what this debate is really going to be about, if it continues in its current vein, redefining marriage. It must be. It's to move marriage away from the age-old understanding of what it is. Two of those consequences, I suspect, when people focus on them, will be of deep concern. They are to me, and I'd like to share them with you. One is that when we hear this talk about gay marriage being, or same-sex marriage being a human right, when you stop and think about it, there are two sets of human rights involved. Same-sex marriage means same-sex parenting, which means that although not all marriages produce children, all children have two biological parents. For society to actually condone and to put into law a construct by which children will be brought into the world and not only denied access to their biological parents, ordained by the state. We know sometimes tragically that happens, but for the state to say that is legitimate and you can have a biological parent's name struck off the birth register raises very troubling human rights issues in its own right, if I can put it that way. And I think Australians are beginning to be aware of that. The second thing that will flow, and this for me is a very serious one, I think the fundamental freedom we enjoy in the West is freedom of belief, and the other side of the coin, freedom of speech. If the state enacts legislation that says that homosexual or gay, same-sex marriage is exactly the same, if you like, as heterosexual marriage, it will then have to defend its position, which will mean that the right I exercised and my wife exercised as our children were growing up to put to them the construct that we thought was right for them to handle their sex lives and their sexual urges, I would not be allowed to do that anymore. The state would say, no, you cannot put your views, the views that I happen to believe in. That is a denial of my right to free speech and to free belief, the core value that we have in a free society. That's a very serious issue indeed. And I think these things are only just beginning to dawn on the Australian people. So I sum up by saying that's why I actually think the polls are suggesting quite strongly that when they're done with integrity, and some of these polls have not been done with integrity, but the ones that have been are suggesting, in fact, that not only is this seen as a lower issue order as time goes on, support for it is drying up. Not drying up, that's perhaps too extreme, but slipping. I really do believe that. So is it inevitable? No, it is not. But I think it would be a very good thing if everyone involved in this were in a civil, polite, informed way, get themselves up to speed and have their say in this public debate.
Patrick, your follow-up from what John's saying.
I think deep down the Australian people know that we have stuffed up when it comes to family life. You know, we've spent 30, 40 years walking away from what marriage means. We've spent all this time changing our laws. There's now almost no difference between being married and living in a de facto relationship. 35% of all babies born in Australia are born outside of marriage, and it's rising every year. 12% of all babies born in Australia are born without mum and dad living in the same house. I think we are reaping the whirlwind of this, and we know it. Deep down, we know it. And what we can do as Christians, what we can do tonight is to say it and say it out aloud. And that's where the same-sex marriage debate matters. Because we have to say, we have to recommit as a society to what marriage means, what family means, and honour that again. As heterosexual people, we have walked away from that. I think the Australian people deep down know that we have made a real mess. And this might be a watershed, this might be a time when we begin to turn back the tide.
Let me just stay with you, Patrick. We had another email question from Jenny Missenden from Queensland, and Jenny writes, is the refusal to recognise same-sex unions as marriage discriminatory as it's claimed? Now, both you and John are kind of hinting at that. What is your view about the whole idea that this is discriminatory, or this is unjust, or this is unfair? How do you respond to that?
I should explain, I'm a family lawyer. I've spent a lot of time in public policy working on family issues. And throughout that time, I've supported same-sex equality on a whole range of issues, various rights in which a heterosexual couple have certain rights and the same-sex couple should have the same sort of rights. And I think that is the way we should go. But marriage has always meant, in every culture, in every society, throughout history, the union of a man and a woman. And so what I say is, look, it's a bit like there's a rose and there's a carnation. You're not saying that a rose and a carnation are the same thing, they're just different things. A marriage and a same-sex relationship are different things. I'm not saying one is better than the other, one is worse than the other. I'm not going to discriminate against the other. But what I'm saying is that a same-sex relationship is not a marriage and should never be recognised as such. And that's just giving the right label to different forms of relationships. Not discrimination, just description.
Just staying with you, Patrick, in this whole issue about being unjust, particularly, lots of laws have been changed in Australia to make sure that, from a justice point of view, that relationship is honoured in law. Isn't that right?
That's right, yeah. There's now pretty much no area of life, either state or federal laws, where a same-sex couple have fewer rights than a heterosexual couple, pretty much none. And marriage itself has been watered down, so there's almost no difference between a marriage and a de facto relationship. So this is not about equality, not in Australia. Equality is already there. This is about definition and description and the preservation of our history and culture.
Yeah. Patricia, give us some thoughts from your perspective on this question of discrimination. Do you see it, agreeing with what Patrick's saying? Is that how you see this?
I totally agree with what Patrick says. For one thing is that most of my friends are homosexuals and atheists because I work in the field of sexology. And the point is that when you look at marriage and then you think, okay, if we sort of just start stretching the limits, and we say, okay, well, it's same-sex marriage, then, I mean, as a sexologist, I have to look at the sort of plethora of sexual practice and think, then what? For instance, I belong to a group called the International Academy of Sex Research. We sort of meet once a year and talk about, well, sex. And every year there's this sort of symposia, which are like cutting-edge topics. And this year, one of the topics is polyamory. Polyamory is where a group of people, male and female of varying number, get together and live as if in a de facto relationship. So polygamy, but polyamory. And then there's another area that we're studying, and that is called genetic sexual attraction. That is sibling attraction, where two, brother or sister or father and daughter, are separated when the child is born or when they're very young, and they meet later and they fall in love. So when you think you sort of stretch marriage beyond male, female adults, then where's it going to end?
Let me go back to a question we asked before when we were talking to Helen Allen about how do you therefore relate to all of these people that you're dealing with on an ongoing basis with a Christian worldview? Do they think you're homophobic?
Oh no, because the point is that they realize that as a Christian, I mean, I know that my identity isn't in my heterosexuality. I'm very clear that my identity is in the fact that my identity is in Christ and just founded on who I am in Christ and the cross. And so I would tell my homosexual friends, look, I adore you, and they know. I mean, I trust some of them more than I trust some of my Christian friends, and they know that. So, but the point is, I would call them to be with me in that identity, because that's, I must say that some of our churches, we've fallen short there, because we've got to be so sure of our identity in Christ, and then we can call homosexuals to come join us in that identity. Because part of, I think, looking for marriage is looking for some sort of identity. And if we don't provide the identity in the churches, then people will go elsewhere. And that, to a homosexual, is to the homosexual lifestyle and identity.
Fantastic. Just going on to another area, many studies have been looking at the impact of same-sex marriage on couples and on kids. How does the stability of home and marriage impact the future of kids? Helen, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, stability is the number one foundation block, as I said before. And where children struggle with the issue of people coming and going in their lives, especially carers or a parent who's there and they're not there, they have huge abandonment issues in their lives. And it creates a problem for the kids in terms of grief and loss issues. It creates a world of anxiety for the child. And then, of course, as I said before, that affects their learning ability, it affects their ongoing relationships, and it affects their future as adults, which we've had to deal a lot with, and why we developed some of our programs to help adults who came through that kind of environment to somehow live a life where they can feel safe, where they can feel secure, and where they can gain their own identity, because the identity issues are another thing that come out of a family where there's instability, where there's parents coming and going, or perhaps lovers, or it's not monogamous, and they get attached to that particular person and they disappear out of their lives. It has a huge impact on the child.
Yeah. Yes, Patricia.
I also do sex education, and I talk to teens and do group work with teens. And one of the things we find is that today, the age at which teenagers, young people are having sex is dropping. And you talk to young people, and you find that a lot of young people don't have that role model of a male and a female integrous, loving relationship, which is other-focused, which is looking rather to what can I do for you rather than how can I get my desires met. And they're not seeing that role model of marriage, with the marriages breaking down. And that is so sad. I mean, every time I meet them, it's just so sad that we are not providing them that marriage role model of love of man and woman, and that giving and sharing that is so beyond sex, but sex is so much a part of.
Patrick, I know there's been lots of studies, and there's a lot of kind of heat around this, isn't there, as to is a child better or worse off if they're in a same-sex couple? And I know that there's been some research just released in America, but it just seems to produce so much kind of angst, doesn't it?
Oh, this is a hugely controversial and difficult area. One of the problems is that the samples are just so small. If you go out and do research and try to find kids raised in a lesbian family or a gay male family, they're really hard to find. The other question is, well, who are you comparing them with? Are you comparing them with single mums, with step families, with you know, the various other combinations of family life that we have? Now, there has been a new study which is one of the most rigorous which has been done, and one of the largest. And what it's showing is that on 40 different characteristics, children who grew up in at some time with the same-sex couple, on 25 out of those 40, they were doing worse than kids who were raised by two parents, married parents throughout their childhoods. They were doing about the same as kids raised mainly by a single mum or
so
a
this
step-family.
was 25 out of 40 indicators demonstrated that they were doing worse. Now, I've actually seen some reactions to this, because there's some pretty vigorous reaction to any of these sorts of studies, isn't there?
Yeah.
And it kind of continues to build the debate for the family.
I think, if I may come back to John Anderson and his children, we have known, and through the research, we have known for generations throughout every society that fathers and mothers give different things to kids. what John Anderson said about mum's nurturing and her father's being more involved in adventure and play is just so well understood by social scientists. Now, let's go back to those fundamentals. That when you have a male and a female raising children, when they are committed to each other, when they have a stable, secure home for the child, from day one to the day that they leave home, which may be about 35 these days.
If then.
It's not rocket science that those kids will do well. And in a situation where some of those things aren't there, the stability isn't there, or the role model isn't there, there are deficits. Kids are not going to do so well. We don't need a million more studies to tell us that.
John?
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, in the end we can have, and we are having, very heated debates about what the research shows. But can I come back to something that I said earlier? And I urge all of you and listeners everywhere to confront the issue that I touched on a moment ago. If we are talking about children growing up in the context of a same-sex marriage with two parents of the same sex, where the state, the government, that is us, they have acted on our behalf to say that some children should be deliberately denied access to and even legal recognition of their biological mother or father. I think that is a very profound human rights issue. I have to say that. I'm deeply troubled by it. And I don't think that's being addressed. It's over and above and beyond and even more important than the research about how children do, I think. Because it goes to the heart of whether we're going to commodify children and continue to value them according to who wants them or whether they're wanted or who doesn't want them, whether we're actually going to put some parents through the agony of bringing a child into the world and then being struck off a birth register, as we've seen happen in the state already. Can I put it to you, those are very profound questions. And once the state, acting on your behalf, legislates for that sort of outcome, they will then have to back it. They will have to say, you cannot speak favourably of one form of relationship over another. That will, by definition, become something that the government will have to start to take up. You know, your right to believe and to pass on your beliefs, to speak about them to your children, in fact, I'd say, you know, your right and your responsibility will be curtailed.
There'll be some that would say that that's kind of, you know, is that scaremongering? But it's interesting that in some places overseas, that's actually been the outcome, hasn't it? Give us an example of that.
Well, there are others who can give better examples of it, but this is a slippery slope argument, you see, isn't it? No, we won't insist that the churches, for example, don't have to, you know, must marry same-sex couples. Well, we've just seen in Denmark laws now which say that churches must. If an individual pastor says he won't on a matter of conscience, his or her church must find someone who will. And then you've seen in America some of these instances where parents have actually been told they have no legal right to impose their view, a favourable view of heterosexual marriage, onto their children. That has actually happened in Massachusetts.
Patrick, you've got examples?
This is happening all over the Western world. In Britain, people are losing their jobs because they have a conscience-based objection to same-sex marriage. One man wrote on his private Facebook website, look, the state can do whatever it wants. If it wants to legalise same-sex marriage, that's up to the state, but churches should not be forced to celebrate same-sex marriages. Hardly a radical statement. It represents the law of Britain at the present time. That man was demoted from his job. He was threatened with dismissal. And this was a private communication on his website, on his Facebook site, supporting the current law in Britain. These are not isolated examples, Carl. The issues that John Anderson is raising about freedom of belief and freedom of speech are very, very real.
Yeah. And they are fundamental to the very freedoms that are now being used, I would say, regrettably in some cases, abused, in pursuit of change. Their genesis is, in fact, in Christian faith, in the hard fought for right for people to believe and to speak their minds. as they chose. We should not give that up lightly.
We're going to come back right towards the end about what we would do to make sure we don't give that up. Heterosexual marriages fail and can be childless. Does this not blunt the argument against same-sex marriage? The idea that marriage is for having children, therefore, you know, if there's heterosexual marriages that don't have children, doesn't that blunt the argument? John?
No, I actually think it rather strengthens it. All the evidence that we see of having weakened marriage producing disastrous outcomes for children and therefore for society. This is the point about you can't privatise marriage. It's a public issue, this. Marriage is a public as well as a private institution because of the impact it has on our society and the costs we all pay, personally and financially and economically, when families go wrong and troubled children are, to put it in Kennedy's language, not able to ask what they can do for their country, but have to ask their country to support them, if you take what I mean by all of that. It is actually a very powerful argument for saying we've taken marriage too lightly. We all know that marriage can be hard. We all know that tragically sometimes it doesn't work. But we need to set the gold standard, don't we? We all of us fail in our diets. We know what we ought to eat, but we don't say, well, we ought to all move on to junk food and just give up. And we need to avoid that temptation with something like marriage, which is so important for us as individuals. There's a sense in which my heart goes out to those who are looking for happiness in stable, long-term relationships. I think we're wired that way. I think we need it. I think it's about commitment. I think the piece of paper, is actually incredibly important. I hear people say, oh, the piece of paper doesn't matter. Well, the evidence suggests it does. Making a public declaration that you matter so much to me that I will give you this piece of paper in itself is, I think, a very significant thing. We need to, again, recognise that we are wired for deep, hard as it may be, long-term commitment in a marriage context and reinforce and reinvigorate our commitment to it in our community for our children's sake. I'll make this observation. A very perceptive writer, Daniel Altman in the United States, a Harvard graduate, has written a very interesting article called The United States of Narcissism. And his argument is that the economic decline of the West has to do with the way that we have decided that the most important person in the world is me. And we have loaded ourselves up with debt, with cheap credit, and all of these sorts of things. We've actually gutted ourselves economically in pursuit of our own ends. Our very obsession with self is undermining our real happiness. But it's having a huge impact, and this is the point, on our society, because unfortunately we're commodifying our children. We're saying our children are about our happiness and meeting our needs, rather than recognising they have unbelievable and total intrinsic value. Every individual does, which is the answer to homophobia. We have no right to be homophobic. Before God, every individual matters. Every individual counts. But most of all, our children who have no voice need to be recognised, not only that they count, but we need to speak for them.
Helen, we really want to... Yes, thanks, John. You shouldn't do that too much. You'll just encourage him too much and it'll be even longer next time.
Helen, I'm not a politician anymore. You know?
Helen, this whole idea, I think what I'm hearing John saying is that, and we've said this a couple of times, marriage is important and we've got to find ways to recommit to marriage. I mean, really, you and Alan, a lot of the work you've been doing, that's what you tried to do, isn't it?
Yeah, because as we said, marriage takes work. And I think it's probably the greatest discipleship tool that God ever invented. I mean, who else is going to actually tell you the truth about yourself or watch you when you're at your worst, losing your temper or whatever it happens to be?
Not that was Alan.
No.
Somebody else you'd heard
That's
of.
That's right.
Yes.
That's never happened.
No. But marriage itself is actually a great tool for us to be able to grow as individuals. And exactly what John's saying is go beyond yourself to caring about the other person. But in the process of rubbing shoulders with that other person and doing life with them, it's actually developing you as a person. You're growing as a person, learning about unconditional love. But we do need the tools to do that. It's not automatic. And that's part of what we've been on about in equipping churches.
I think John's right when he says that we haven't had this discussion in any depth for a really long time. I think there's quite a few things we haven't had much of a discussion about, and one of them is the way in which sex has become idolatry. It's just all about my own personal fulfilment, and sex is more than that. For a generation to learn any differently, however, there's got to be something that the church calls discipleship. And I think back with some significant disappointment on spending 27 years in a Bible-believing church, which was a great place to be, and not hearing a single thing ever in any detail on sex in 27 years. Now, I started to come to think that people in our church didn't have sex, and I was prepared to move to another church and see. But it was just that we didn't want to say anything. And as a result, the very precious foundations that are found in the insight, the revelation that the Bible has on sex, on marriage, on parenting, on identity, the very issue of finding one's identity in something bigger than yourself and your own excitement in Christ himself. This requires discipleship. And it's to this that we have devoted ourselves. Our church grew in its significance and its impact in its community when we learned how to go beyond ourselves and begin to help our local community do marriage better, to parent better, to resolve the disruption of perhaps growing in a dysfunctional family background and learning how not to have to perpetuate that for the next one. And my appeal because this is going to churches, is that the church has a tremendous responsibility to disciple people really well on sex, to not be silent on these issues, to really do great discipleship on marriage, on how to form and build really healthy families that do last a lifetime. I'm one of the richest men in the world. I'm married to a beautiful woman, 44 years. We met in high school. I'm grateful to say my entire sexual experience in life is with the woman I'm married to, not because I haven't felt the attractions, but because I had an anchor for my soul that I found in Jesus, I found in the Bible, and as a result, I now have not only 4 kids who love me, but now I've got 10 grandchildren. There's nothing richer in life than to see this growing circle of healthy individuals that look to you for leadership and find it. And I would say to the churches involved, you've got to fight for marriage. You've got to work towards healthier marriages. It's not enough to have a night like this and say, yeah, we all need, but it now requires diligent, ongoing work at the local community level in which people who've been through divorce are helped to recover from that. Young men and women are growing up with a theology of sex and an understanding as to why integrity, commitment, you can't have a committed long-term marriage relationship if you've never learned to control your sex drive. And if you don't learn that from childhood, you may never learn it at all. And as a result, there's another broken family and another wounded group of children. And I think the church has got a great job ahead of it. Let's do that job we were given of discipling people.
Good job, Alan. Thank you. We've touched on this a little bit before, but over the last couple of months, there's been a growing push towards polygamous groups who want to get on the bandwagon, which is what you kind of hinted at before, and as well as Patrick did as well. But I think this is a fairly key issue. What's to stop, if same-sex marriage comes in, Patricia, what is to stop polygamous groups? Anything?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm not the lawyer, so I should really throw that to Patrick.
We'll give it a try, and then we'll see if we were right.
Okay. But I don't see that there's any reason why it should, because if there is marriage equality, then equality has to really mean that you could marry anyone. Isn't it, Patrick? I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, well, that was a fairly short answer.
That's called a flip pass.
Well, it's great to have a short answer tonight. Look.
Well, that's a little cruel. Keep going.
I'm a lawyer. Once you move away from the definition of marriage as the union of a man and a woman for life to the exclusion of all others, anything goes. You cannot possibly say that once you move away from that definition that you can't have consensual relationships which aren't also to be recognised as marriages. This isn't just pie-in-the-sky stuff. I've just come back from a conference in the States. Guess what we were talking about? Recognition of polygamy. They're talking about it in Canada, they're talking about it all over the place now, because there are consensual polygamous relationships who want to be recognised as marriage too. After all, it's their human right. So this is a really important debate.
In that whole process, though, what about the argument that, and this is probably an odd question to ask the lawyer, we love each other, isn't that enough?
It's enough for all sorts of things, but it's not enough for marriage.
Yeah,
Because
you
you cannot privatise marriage. You see what I mean by that? There's a huge public interest in it. It isn't just about me and my wife. It's about the children I bring into the world and whether they are going to be emotionally secure, whether they're going to be contributors. We all know it goes wrong sometimes, but we also know how to maximise the chances of it going right and how to minimise the chances of the state, that's you, in the end as taxpayers, having to cope with all of the implications of dysfunctional families, from the court systems to the mediation to the taxation burden of multiple dysfunctional families across a community, which are huge, by the way, absolutely enormous.
Yeah. John, can I just add to that one other thing? The vision that we present to the next generation about what life is all about. And when you begin to destroy the foundations, what vision are we presenting to the next generation and the one beyond that about a great and glorious and growing nation? We're destroying the vision. I'm happily married, at least in part, because I saw a vision in my own father and my own mother. My father loved my mother. It moved me, it marked my heart. I have 4 children. I have now 10 grandchildren. I want to present to them a vision that could carry a nation into greatness, not watch it decline into a very disappointing and confusing pudding.
And can I just say, back in the 70s, there were groups of people who were doing the polymorphic type of lifestyle, where they had couples together, sex between them, producing children. And, you know, one stage there's 20 children, and one particular one I know of, and 15 people, adults. And as a result of that, Alan and I actually were involved with counselling the children that came out of those kind of setups. Yeah. They were the most disturbed, depressed, anxious, hated growing up in that kind of scene. And so if this is where, in terms of the slippery slope, we're actually going to go, and we've had first-hand experience with dealing with those children, I do not want the children of this society having to deal with that kind of thing.
Well, let's go to our last question. We know this is a huge national debate, and people listening tonight may feel that they're just watching it unfold and have no influence. Is there a way for churches and Christians to influence politics and or the media, John?
Look, absolutely. Let me deal with one issue first. I sometimes hear it said now that Christians, particularly if they're going to enter the public debate, should leave their faith out of it. Can I say no one who understands their history would ever say that? The history of our culture is that our freedoms, our democratic ideals and so forth are based in the Christian worldview that says every individual matters. The story of the Good Samaritan, 10 Commandments, critical to our law, and respect for one another. The Beatitudes, very influential in the radical way, which they've turned on its head the normal human view, which is that power comes at the point of a gun or to the bloke with the biggest checkbook. That's not the way we do things in the West. What has made us different was the belief system, the worldview that arose out of Christianity. And I say that because without being proud about it, we should be secure in the contribution, in the knowledge that we've made an enormous contribution to the building of our society. Adam Hochschild, the American secular historian, estimates that before the evangelical Christians began their campaign to free people from slavery, 3/4 of the world's population lived in one form of slavery or another. It was the Christians who led the greatest human rights movement of all times. And to this day, if you pull the Christians out of the public debate, out of the public square, out of the works that they do in everything from AIDS orphanages in Tanzania through to, you know, even sitting around cabinet tables making their contribution, the nation will be infinitely the poorer.
So, John...
So without being proud...
Yep, go for it.
Pride is a terrible sin. Be secure. You do have something to offer. Having said that, know your stuff and then build relationships with power brokers. Get to know and build relationships with your local members, state and federal. The great majority of them, I say to you in good faith, are reasonable human beings who want to do the right thing. And they will appreciate you building a constructive relationship with them. Get to know them. Work out how you're going to do it as a church. Tell them you're praying for them, you care for them, you recognise how difficult their job is. They'll love you for it, because nobody else is telling them that, especially at the moment. Do something for them that the media never does, and recognise that many of them are well motivated. Yeah. And then, you know, don't underestimate the power of writing letters to the editor. And the young people can tell us what the modern electronic version of that looks like. But get your voice out there, recognise you're going to get clobbered, because there's a lot of vicious language used these days. And I come back to this point, we need to learn civility again. Exactly. But we need to demonstrate the model by putting our case clearly on a well-informed basis, on a loving basis, on an informed and a civil sort of basis, and then turn the other cheek when people are rude in response.
Wow. Patrick, from a lawyer's point of view, and I want to go from Alan from a community development point of view. We've just got a couple of minutes. From a law point of view, is there a way of influencing? Is it, as just what John said, make sure your voice is in the public square?
Very much so. You wouldn't believe the impact that a fairly small number of people can have on public policy. That's what this whole debate's about at the moment. It's a fairly small number of people who are driving it all. So it's really critical that our voices are heard, and God calls us into the public square. God calls us to be involved. Pray for those who are involved as well. But laws are the reflection of politics, and we can influence that.
And Alan, you did this locally, didn't you?
Yeah, I was at Patrick's launch last year of the issue about For Kids' Sake. And one of the things that Patrick was saying is that the governments can't fix this. You can't just legislate for healthy marriages. This has got to be done at a local level. There's got to be people working with individuals, sitting in groups, teaching them things they don't know, helping them to resolve conflicts they've never learned to resolve, teaching them to think differently, teaching them to have a different vision for how relationships can be. Christians call that discipleship. And we left our church a couple of years ago to devote ourselves to helping churches be healing communities. And at the end of the day, this has to be done from the highest level to the lowest level. It's got to be done at the grassroots level. It's got to be done by local churches who care enough about their local communities to teach kids to manage their sex lives, to teach men and women to honour one another, to have a vision for marriage, to bring healing to divorces that have damaged people's hearts, restore them and help them build a better life in the future. Now that's what we devote ourselves to, helping churches do good work at the local level with individuals, one life at a time. And for me, that's where we'll focus. And I would want to just encourage churches, do great restorative ministry in your own area, build the vision of Christ and his love for people, the power of forgiveness, the power of a vision for life, and that will be a contribution you can make that nobody else can.
Fantastic. So we're out of time, and I trust that you've found tonight helpful. And would you please thank the panellists for me, John Anderson, Patrick Parkinson, Patricia Werracoon, Alan Meyer and Helen Meyer. So thanks for being with us tonight. Wherever in Australia you've watched this, we trust it's really helped you. To close tonight's webcast, here is a word from the Australian Christian Lobby Managing Director, Jim Wallace.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this great privilege our panel has given us tonight. I hope too you believe with us that marriage is worth defending. And more importantly, I think for us as Christians, the truth it represents about God's purpose for relationship and the flourishing of children. Despite what we're told, there is no inevitability about same-sex marriage. Only 10 of the 196 countries in the world have it. But with our Parliament likely to vote on it in August, it's important as both churches and individuals that you contact your local federal member over July and graciously confirm its importance to you. But first, let's get your friends to love marriage again. And before you leave tonight, Watch this and share it on social media. Thanks again for joining us.
Boy meets girl. Boy desires girl. Girl desires boy. As the days and weeks and months went by, boy and girl fell in love and pondered over the nature of their relationship. They decided they wanted to get married. Why? Because they are a boy and a girl who might one day want to make little boys and little girls of their own. This is called the act of marriage, and it's currently legislated by the Marriage Act of Australia, defined as between a man and a woman. Their love is not protected by the Marriage Act. See, their love was filled with passion and desire, though their sexual energy did not need protection from the government. They had a strong friendship, though the government had better things to do than to set the terms of that friendship. Their love was about sacrifice, though the government did not need to ensure that they put each other first. The government legislates marriage because the central purpose of marriage is to produce offspring, and biologically, one boy plus one girl is the recipe for more boys and girls. It's our ancient and organic origins. Marriage the way it currently is doesn't take away any rights or laws from other types of couples in Australia. 84 laws were changed to ensure there is no discrimination against any couples in Australia. There's a place for every relationship in Australia, so let's keep the Marriage Act intact. When 73% of Australians believe that babies should be raised by their biological mum and dad, and when 72% of Australian children are today being raised by both their biological parents in 2.1 million families. If we add to or subtract from the Marriage Act, it will no longer be what it is. The Marriage Act is not only about love. Why would you want the government to regulate your love anyway? So, the boy and the girl decided they wanted to get married because they were one boy and one girl who one day might want to make little boys and little girls of their own and raise their future generations together as a couple. That's what the Marriage Act legislates. Let's celebrate marriage.